I moved into my dream house. Then I discovered the dark secret hidden in the basement. I thought moving into my dream house would be the start of something amazing. If finally, a home I could call my own. The moment I stepped inside, it felt perfect, like it was meant for me. But what I uncovered in the basement changed everything. It wasn't just a dark corner of the house, but something much, much worse. When I first saw the house, I was in awe. It was everything I had ever dreamed of. A charming old home with a beautiful garden, lots of space, and a cozy atmosphere that made me feel instantly at peace. I had spent years saving for this moment, and after months of searching, this place seemed perfect. The kind of house you see in magazines, but rarely get to live in. It was my sanctuary. I moved in with my dog, Max, excited to start fresh in a new neighborhood. The house had a few creaks and groans, but nothing unusual for a building of its age. The floors were hardwood, the ceilings high, and the kitchen had these gorgeous vintage tiles that I instantly fell in love with. It was everything I wanted. The first few weeks were bliss. I spent my days unpacking and decorating, making the house truly feel like home. But there was one part of the house I hadn't explored fully, the basement. Every time I went down the narrow stairs to do laundry or store some things, I felt a strange, uneasy sensation in the pit of my stomach. The air down there always felt colder, thicker, as if something was lurking just out of sight. It wasn't much of a basement, just a low-ceilinged room with exposed beams and old, dusty boxes. I would quickly grab what I needed and leave, not thinking much of it. But one evening, after a long day of work, I went down there to fetch a tool I had left behind. And that's when everything changed. Max was acting strange, whining and pacing, his fur standing on end. I didn't think much of it at first, assuming he was just reacting to the unfamiliar sounds of the house settling. But as I turned the corner to the far side of the basement, I froze. There, hidden behind some old furniture and boxes, was a door. A door I hadn't seen before. It wasn't part of the house's original layout, at least not as far as I could tell. It was small, tucked away behind piles of junk, and looked like it hadn't been opened in years. My heart skipped a beat as I stared at it, my mind racing with curiosity and caution. I reached for the handle. The door creaked open, revealing a narrow hallway that led even further down into the darkness. The air grew colder as I stepped closer, and Max's whimpering grew louder. What was this? Why was it hidden? And most importantly, why had I never noticed it before? I hesitated for a moment, the chill in the air intensifying. Max was now standing behind me, his whimpering turning into soft growls. I could almost feel the weight of the darkness pressing in from all sides. I almost turned back, but my curiosity got the better of me. I had to know what was behind that door. Taking a deep breath, I stepped into the narrow hallway. It smelled musty, like an old abandoned building. The floor creaked beneath my feet, and the dim light from the basement did little to illuminate the path ahead. I took a few steps forward, the space feeling more and more like a hidden secret with each step. It was almost as if the house had been keeping something from me. The hallway stretched on for what seemed like an eternity. At the end, I noticed another door, this one even older than the one I had just come through. The wood was cracked and splintered, but there was something intriguing about it, something that made my pulse race. I reached for the handle and turned it. The door opened with a loud creak, and I was greeted by a room so dark that it felt suffocating. I could barely make out anything beyond the faintest outline of the walls. There were no windows, no light, just an overwhelming sense of claustrophobia. My breath quickened as I stepped into the room, feeling a cold draft sweep past me. Max was now pulling at the leash, tugging me back towards the hallway, but I couldn't bring myself to leave. Not yet. Something inside me pushed me forward, compelling me to discover what was hidden in the shadows. I reached for my phone and turned on the flashlight, its weak beam cutting through the darkness. What I saw next sent a shiver down my spine. In the corner of the room, there was an old, rusted chest. It was covered in dust and cobwebs, the kind of chest you'd expect to find in a horror movie. My heart thudded in my chest as I approached it. I didn't know why, but I felt like I had to open it. Maybe it was the mystery of it all, or maybe it was just the eerie sensation that I had already stumbled upon something I wasn't meant to find. With trembling hands, I knelt down and opened the chest. The hinges squeaked loudly, and I braced myself for what was inside. What I found was not what I was expecting. Inside the chest, there was an assortment of old papers, yellowed with age and crinkled from years of neglect. My heart was racing as I pulled out the first sheet, which appeared to be some sort of journal. The handwriting was messy, almost frantic, as though whoever had written it had been in a hurry or under extreme distress. I couldn't help but feel a sense of dread as I skimmed through the pages. The entries were dated years ago, long before I had ever moved into this house. The writer described strange happenings, whispers in the walls, and feelings of being watched. At first, I thought it might just be the ramblings of someone who had spent too much time alone in the dark, but the more I read, the more I began to feel unsettled. One entry stood out above the rest. The shadows in the basement move on their own. I've seen them more than once. I don't think I'm alone here anymore. I'm starting to feel like something is waiting for me. Something that wants me to stay. But I can't. I need to get out before it's too late. The words sent a cold chill through me. My stomach twisted, and for a moment, I felt nauseous. I scanned the room again, as if expecting the shadows themselves to leap out at me. But nothing happened. I pushed the journal back into the chest and pulled out a few more papers, but they were all written in the same frantic tone. What had I gotten myself into? I thought I was just moving into a beautiful home, one that would help me escape from the chaos of city life. Instead, it seemed like I had stumbled into something much darker, something I wasn't prepared to face. Max continued to pull at the leash, now almost frantic himself. His body was stiff, his ears flat against his head, and I could tell he was terrified. I should have listened to him earlier. He knew something I didn't. I stood there, torn between staying and running. The basement was supposed to be my sanctuary, my fresh start, but now it felt like a prison, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. I snapped the chest shut and grabbed Max's leash, my hands shaking. I backed out of the room slowly, my eyes darting around the shadows, convinced that I was being watched. The air felt thick, suffocating. I had to leave. But as I turned to head back up the stairs, something caught my eye. It was a small silver key lying on the floor by the door. Make sure to like the video and subscribe so you never miss more shocking and real stories like this one. I stared at the key for a moment, unsure of what to do. It wasn't like it belonged to any of the doors in the house, and yet it felt oddly significant. I crouched down, my hand trembling slightly as I picked it up. It was old, but it had a certain weight to it, like it was meant to unlock something important. Max tugged on his leash again, his anxiety palpable. His movements were sharp, and his ears were still pressed flat against his head. I couldn't ignore him any longer. Something in my gut was telling me that, whatever was going on in this house, I needed to get out now. But I couldn't shake the feeling that the key in my hand was calling me. It wasn't like I could just ignore it. With a heavy sigh, I pocketed the key and led Max back upstairs. The air felt thick, as if the house itself was holding its breath. The walls seemed to close in on me, and the more I tried to push the feeling away, the more intense it became. I rushed to the front door, but as I reached for the handle, I hesitated. The basement, the key, and the journal, they were all still on my mind. I thought about leaving, about getting in my car and driving away. But then something stopped me. Maybe it was the fact that I was too invested now. Maybe it was the fact that I knew deep down that something wasn't right, and I had to find out what it was. But whatever it was, I couldn't leave. Max whimpered at my side, sensing my internal struggle. I took one last look at the basement door, and then, without another thought, turned back toward the stairs. The key in my pocket felt heavier with each step. I had to find out what it unlocked. I stood at the top of the stairs, looking down at the basement door. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was waiting for me down there, something that I wasn't supposed to find. But the more I thought about it, the more I knew I couldn't leave the house without getting answers. Max growled low in his throat, his hackles raised as he stared at the door. His unease was becoming contagious. The house felt like it was alive, like it was watching me, waiting for me to make a decision. I gripped the key tightly in my hand, feeling the cold metal against my palm. I took a deep breath and turned the key in the lock. The door creaked open slowly, revealing the dark, musty space beyond. My heart pounded in my chest, and I hesitated for a moment, wondering if I was making a mistake. But there was no turning back now. I stepped into the basement, the air thick with dust and the smell of mildew. The faint sound of dripping water echoed in the silence, and the only light came from the small bulb above my head, flickering like it might go out at any moment. Max was hesitant to follow, his paws dragging against the floor. He was clearly not a fan of whatever was down here, but he wasn't about to leave me alone. His anxiety mirrored mine as we ventured deeper into the basement. The walls were lined with old crates and boxes, some marked with faded labels, others completely covered in dust. But what caught my attention was the far corner of the room, where a large old chest sat. It was locked, but there was no mistaking it. It looked exactly like the one from the journal. I approached cautiously, my pulse racing. There was no way I was imagining this. The chest was real, and the key in my hand, it had to fit. Max growled again, louder this time, as if warning me to stop, but I ignored him. I had come this far, and there was no way I was turning back now. The key slid into the lock with a satisfying click, and I opened the chest. What I found inside made my stomach drop. Inside the chest, there was an assortment of old papers, photographs, and strange objects that I couldn't quite make sense of. But what caught my attention the most was a dusty leather-bound book at the very top of the pile. Its cover was cracked and worn, as if it had been handled by many hands over the years. I pulled the book out slowly, the weight of it feeling unnervingly heavy in my hands. The pages inside were yellowed with age, and the ink faded in places. As I flipped through the pages, the words seemed to blur together. But then I stopped at a page with a diagram that looked eerily similar to the layout of the house. The diagram showed a hidden passage beneath the house, leading to what looked like a room in the back corner of the basement where I'd never been. There was something else, something written in the margin of the page that made my blood run cold. It's not just the house that's haunted, the walls remember. I felt a chill run through me, as if the words themselves had breathed life into the air. I looked around the basement, suddenly feeling like I was no longer alone. Max's growl had stopped, replaced with an unsettling silence. The house felt even more alive now, as though it were watching me, waiting for me to make the next move. I closed the book quickly, my heart pounding in my chest. This wasn't just some harmless discovery, it was something darker. And the more I thought about it, the more I realized that I wasn't just dealing with a house. I was dealing with a legacy. I stood frozen in the basement, clutching the book with trembling hands. My heart was racing as I tried to process what I had just read. The diagram, the cryptic note, it all pointed to something that had been hidden for years, buried beneath my dream home. Max's growl cut through the air again, more insistent this time. It snapped me out of my daze. I glanced at him, noticing that his body was tense and his ears were pinned back. He was fixated on the far corner of the room, where the old furnace sat, casting long shadows across the stone walls. My breath hitched in my chest as I realized that I hadn't fully explored the basement yet. The farthest I'd gone was near the furnace, but I'd always been too afraid to venture deeper into that part of the space. There had always been something unsettling about it. Now, with this newfound knowledge, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was on the edge of something far darker than I could have ever imagined. I carefully made my way toward the furnace, the floor creaking beneath my feet with every step. Max followed me cautiously, his low growls vibrating in his chest. We reached the furnace, and I kneeled down to get a closer look. There, at the base of the wall, was a small rusted metal door. It was barely noticeable, hidden behind a stack of old wood and debris. I wiped away the dust, revealing the faint outline of a keyhole. My stomach dropped. This was it, the hidden room, the one described in the book. I had to know what was inside. I grabbed the old metal door handle, my hand shaking as I turned it. The door creaked open slowly, revealing a narrow passage leading further into the dark, musty depths of the basement. A cold, damp breeze rushed past me, sending chills down my spine. My heart pounded in my chest as I stepped forward, the smell of mildew and something far more pungent filling the air. Max hesitated at the threshold, his growls quiet but persistent. I could feel his unease in the air around us. "It's okay, boy," I muttered, though I wasn't sure if I believed it myself. I had to know what was hidden down here. I took a step inside, feeling the floor beneath me shift slightly. The tunnel was barely wide enough for me to stand comfortably, forcing me to hunch over as I made my way deeper. The passage curved, and soon I could barely make out the edges of the walls. I fumbled for my phone, using the flashlight to guide the way. The further I went, the more the air seemed to thicken, heavy with the weight of secrets that had been buried for so long. After what felt like an eternity, I came to a small, round chamber. The walls were lined with old, cracked stone, and in the center of the room sat a large, weathered wooden chest. It was covered in dust and cobwebs, but there was something almost inviting about it. Max, still by my side, let out a low whimper. I glanced down at him, and for a moment I saw the same fear in his eyes that I felt in my chest. I didn't have time to second-guess myself. My curiosity, fueled by the mounting anxiety, urged me forward. I stepped cautiously toward the chest, my heart beat loud in my ears. The room was dead silent, save for the sound of Max's breathing and the rustling of my footsteps. I reached the chest and knelt in front of it, my hands trembling as I wiped the dust off the surface. The wood was old, but sturdy, and there was a strange, unexplainable pull that urged me to open it. But a part of me, an instinct deep within, was warning me not to. Ignoring the voice in my head, I grabbed the rusted lock. With a sharp tug, it fell off with a loud snap. The tension in the room seemed to shift as I lifted the heavy lid. Inside, instead of whatever I expected, were several old leather-bound journals, each one marked with symbols I didn't recognize. As I reached for the first one, I felt a sudden chill run down my spine. Max barked and growled louder, his body stiff and alert. I hesitated, but my fingers gripped the journal before I could change my mind. The moment I touched it, I felt a wave of dizziness wash over me. My vision blurred, and for a second, the room seemed to shift, as if the walls were closing in on me. I forced myself to focus, opening the journal slowly. The pages inside were yellowed with age, and the ink was fading in places, but the words were clear enough. The entries described strange occurrences in the house, whispers, objects moving on their own, and unsettling dreams of a figure hiding in the basement. Before I could make sense of what I was reading, a loud bang echoed from above. My heart skipped a beat. The noise felt too close, too real. Something or someone was upstairs. I froze, the journal still in my hands, my mind racing. Max's growling grew more intense, and I could feel the weight of the silence pressing down on me. My heart was pounding so loudly I thought it might give me away. Whatever had caused that sound, I couldn't ignore it anymore. "Max, stay close," I whispered, trying to steady my breath. I moved quickly but quietly, leaving the journal open on the floor, and crept toward the basement stairs. Max followed, his ears twitching at every sound. The air felt thick with tension as I slowly made my way up the stairs, careful not to make a noise. As I reached the top, I saw the shadow of a figure in the hallway. My blood ran cold. I stood frozen for a moment, not sure if I should turn back or confront whoever was standing there. "Hello?" I called out, my voice shaky. The figure didn't move. My mind raced through a million possibilities, but none of them made any sense. I could hardly breathe as I stepped forward, my feet heavy on the floorboards. When I was close enough, the figure turned. To my shock, it was my neighbor, Mrs. Thompson, holding a lantern. She looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "I was just making sure you were all right," she said in a low, almost apologetic tone. "You've been down there for a while." My mind spun. What was she doing in my house? How did she know about the basement? Before I could ask, she added, "You shouldn't be digging into that house's past. Some secrets are better left buried." The chill in her voice sent a wave of dread through me. I needed answers, but something in her words made me hesitant to push further. I took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. "What are you talking about? What's really down there?" I demanded. She shook her head, her eyes narrowing as if she knew more than she was letting on. "You'll find out soon enough," she muttered, then turned to leave without another word. I watched her go, the weight of her cryptic message hanging heavily in the air. The house felt colder than ever, the silence now more deafening than before. I didn't know what to do. Part of me wanted to chase her down, demand answers, but the other part of me wanted to just leave, to run away from the house and everything tied to it. The secrets, the eerie feeling that seemed to linger in the air. But then I remembered what I had read in the journal, the descriptions of something hiding in the basement, something or someone. The terror that I felt grew stronger, but I knew I couldn't stop now. I had to uncover the truth. As I stood in the hallway, facing the empty, quiet house, I realized something important. No matter what I discovered, I couldn't let fear control me anymore. What do you think? Should I go back down into the basement and find out what's really going on? Let me know what you think in the comments below. And if you want to hear the rest of the story, what happens when I face the dark truth, be sure to hit Like, subscribe, and turn on notifications. You won't want to miss what happens next.